Seventh allusion. This consists of 4 points. First point. The Sharia is directly, without shadow or veil, the result of the divine address through the mystery of divine oneness in respect of absolute dominicality. The highest degrees of the Sufi path and of reality are like parts of the Sharia, or they are always like its means, introduction, and servant. Their results are the incontrovertible matters of the Sharia. That is to say, the ways of the Sufi orders and of reality are like means, servants, and steps for reaching the truths of the Sharia, till at the highest level they are transformed into the meaning of reality and essence of the Sufi way, which are at the heart of the Sharia. So then they become parts of the greater Sharia. It is not right to think of the Sharia as an outer shell and reality as its inner part, and results and aim as some Sufis do. Yes, the Sharia unfolds according to the levels of man. It is wrong to suppose that what the mass of people imagine is the external aspect of the Sharia is its reality, and to give the names of reality and Sufi path to the degrees of the Sharia that are disclosed to the elite. The Sharia has degrees which look to all classes. It is in consequence of this that the further the Sufis and those who seek reality advance, their longing for the truths of the Sharia increases, as does their captivation by them and their following them. They consider the most minor aspect of the prophets, upon whom the blessings and peace practices, to be their greatest aim, and strive to follow them and imitate them. For, however, higher divine revelation is than inspiration, the conduct of the Sharia, which is the fruit of revelation, is higher to the same degree than the conduct of the Sufi path, the fruit of inspiration. Therefore, following the prophets, upon whom blessings and peace practices, is the basis and principal element of the Sufi path. Second point. The Sufi path and way of reality should not exceed being means. If they are made the ultimate aim, the incontrovertible teachings and actions of the Sharia, and following the practices of the Prophet, upon whom blessings and peace become merely a matter of form, while the heart looks beyond them. That is to say, such a person thinks of his circle for the remembrance of God, rather than the obligatory prayers. He is drawn more to his recitations and supplications than to his religious obligations. He is more concerned with avoiding offending against his orders, rules of behavior, than with avoiding grievous sins. Whereas the recitations of the Sufi path cannot be the equivalent of the obligatory acts that constitute the incontestable matters of the Sharia, they cannot take their place. The etiquette of the Sufi path and its invocations should be a solace and a way of obtaining true pleasure from the obligatory acts. They should not themselves be the source. That is, the taqiyya should lead a person to perform the 5 daily prayers assiduously in the mosque. If he performs them there hurriedly as a formality, thinking that he will find true pleasure and perfection in the taqiyya, he is drawing away from reality. Third point. It is sometimes asked, can there be any Sufi path outside the practices of the Prophet, upon whom be blessings and peace, and matters of the Sharia? The answer: there are some such paths, and there are not. There are, because some of the highest saints were executed by the sword of the Sharia, and there are not, because the authoritative scholars among the saints have agreed on this rule of Sadi Shirazi. It is impossible, Sadi, to be victorious on the way of felicity except by following the chosen one. That is, it is impossible for one outside the highway of God's messenger, upon whom be blessings and peace, who does not follow him, to attain the true lights of reality. The meaning of this is as follows. God's messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, was the seal of the prophets and the addressee of God in the name of all mankind. Mankind, therefore, cannot advance outside his highway. It is essential to be under his banner. But since ecstatics and those immersed in divine contemplation are not responsible for their opposition, and since man possesses certain subtle faculties that are not held accountable, and when such faculties dominate a person, he cannot be held responsible for opposing the obligations of the Sharia, and since man possesses subtle faculties that, just as they are not accountable, so they are not under the jurisdiction of the will and cannot be controlled by the mind, for they do not heed the heart or the mind. Certainly, when those faculties dominate in a person, but only at that time, he does not fall from the rank of sainthood by opposing the Sharia. He is held excused, on condition, however, that he does not deny or insult the truths of the Sharia and rules of belief, or display contempt towards them. Even if he does not carry out the injunctions, he has to acknowledge that they are right. But if he is overcome by that state and assumes a position, I seek refuge with God, which infers denial and giving the lie to those incontestable truths, it is the sign that he has deviated from the path. In short, there are two groups that follow the Sufi path outside the bounds of the Sharia. One group, as described above, these people are either overwhelmed by their mental state, immersion, or ecstasy, or intoxication, or they are dominated by some of their subtle faculties that do not heed the injunctions of religion nor listen to the will. They therefore transgress the bounds of the Sharia. But this is not due to their disliking its rulings or not wanting to follow them. They are rather compelled to involuntarily. Among this group are people of sainthood, some of whom have even been temporary saints of high rank. But the authoritative scholars from among the saints have ruled that of these some have been not only outside the bounds of the Sharia, but outside the bounds of Islam. But they are considered to be people of sainthood on condition they have not denied any of the injunctions brought by Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. It is that they do not think of them, or cannot keep them in view, or are not aware of them. They cannot not accept them if they are aware of them. As for the second group, they are carried away by the brilliant pleasures of the Sufi path and way of reality, and since they cannot attain to the pleasures of the truths of the Sharia, which are far more elevated, they suppose them to be dull formalities and are indifferent towards them. They gradually accept the idea that the Sharia is an external shell and that the reality they have found is the essential goal. They say, I have found it, it is enough for me, and act in a way contrary to the injunctions of the Sharia. Any in this group who are in their right minds are responsible. They stray from the path, indeed, become the playthings of a Satan to an extent. Fourth point. Some persons who belong to the divisions of the people of misguidance and innovation are found acceptable by the Muslim community, while others, just like them and not apparently different, are rejected. I always used to wonder about this. For example, although someone like Zamakhshari was one of the most bigoted members of the Mu'tazilat sect, the authoritative Sunni scholars did not pronounce him an unbeliever or misguided. Despite his severe objections, they rather searched for a way to exonerate him. But then they held that Mu'tazilat authorities like Abu Ali Jubbai, who was far less bigoted than Zamakhshari, should be rejected and refuted. I was curious about this for a long time. Then, through divine grace, I understood that Zemahshari's objections about the Sunnis arose from his love of his way, which he looked on as right. That is to say, for example, in his view God could be truly declared free of all fault and defect by saying that animals create their own actions. It was out of love for declaring God free of all fault that he did not accept the Sunnis' principles concerning the creation of actions, whereas the other Mu'tazilat authorities were rejected because their inadequate intelligences could not aspire to the elevated principles of the Sunnis, and they could not fit the Sunnis' extensive laws within their own narrow ideas, and so denied them. In the same way that the Mu'tazilats opposed the Sunnis in theology, so the opposition of some followers of the Sufi path outside the prophets, upon whom blessings and peace practices, is of two kinds. The first, like Zemahshari, out of love for their way or state, they remain somewhat indifferent towards the conduct of the Sharia, because through it they cannot obtain the same degree of pleasure. As for the other kind, God forbid, they think the conduct of the Sharia is unimportant relatively to the principles of the Sufi path, for their narrow understandings cannot comprehend those broad pleasures, and their short stations cannot attain to that elevated conduct. 8. Illusion. This describes 8 abysses. The first, some people who embark on spiritual journeying do not conform completely to the prophets, upon whom the blessings and peace practices, and fall into the abyss of preferring sainthood to prophethood. It is proved in the 24th and 31st words how elevated is prophethood, and how dull sainthood is in relation to it. The second, some of followers of the Sufi path fall into the abyss of preferring extremist saints to the prophets, upon whom the blessings and peace companions, and even of believing those saints to be prophets. It is proved decisively in the 12th and 27th words, and in the addendum on the companions, that the companions acquired such qualities through conversation with the prophet, upon whom the blessings and peace, that cannot be attained through sainthood, and that the companions cannot be surpassed, and that the saints can never reach the degree of the companions. The third, some of those who are excessively bigoted concerning the Sufi path oppose the practices of the Prophet, upon whom the blessings and peace, and give them up because of their preference for the customs, conduct, and recitations of the Sufi way, which they never give up. In this way, they become slack in practicing the conduct of the Sharia and fall into that abyss. As is proved in many of the words, and as veracious authorities of the Sufi path like Imam Ghazali and Imam Rabbani said, the degree of acceptance gained by following a single of the prophets, upon whom blessings and peace practices, cannot be won through 100 personal practices and supererogatory acts of worship. And just as a single obligatory act is superior to 1,000 acts taken from the prophets, upon whom the blessings and peace practices, so a single of those practices is superior to 1,000 practices of Sufism. The fourth, some extremist Sufis suppose inspiration to be like divine revelation and of similar kind to revelation, and fall into an abyss. It has been proved most definitely in the 12th word and in the 25th word about the miraculousness of the Qur'an, how elevated, universal, and sacred is divine revelation, and how insignificant and dull inspirations are in comparison. The fifth, some Sufis who do not understand the essence of the Sufi path, in order to strengthen the weak, encourage the slack, and to lighten the hardships and weariness arising from strenuous service, find delights illuminations and wonders, which are not sought but given to be pleasurable, and they become captivated by them and fall into the abyss of preferring them to worship, acts of service, and recitation of supplications. It is mentioned briefly in the third point of the sixth allusion in the present treatise, and proved decisively in others of the words, that this world is the realm of service and not the realm of reward. People who seek their recompense here both transform enduring, perpetual fruits into a transitory, temporary form and find permanence in this world pleasing, so they do not yearn for the intermediate realm. Quite simply, they love the life of this world in one respect, since they find a sort of hereafter within it. The sixth, some of those who embark on spiritual journey fall into an abyss by confusing the shades and shadows and partial samples of the stations of sainthood with its fundamental, universal stations. As is proved clearly in the second branch of the 24th word, and in others of the words, the sun becomes numerous by means of mirrors, and thousands of its similitudes possess light and heat like the sun itself, despite their paltriness in relation to the actual sun. In exactly the same way, the stations of the prophets and the great saints possess shades and shadows. Those who journey with the Spirit enter this, and see themselves as greater than those great saints, or even to have advanced further than the prophets, and so fall into an abyss. However, the way to avoid this is to always take the principles of belief and fundamentals of the Sharia as one's basis and guide, and to look on one's illuminations and visions as opposed to them. The seventh, some of the people of illumination and ecstasy fall into an abyss in their spiritual journeyings by preferring pride, complaints, ecstatic utterances, public regard, and being referred to offering thanks and supplication, beseeching Almighty God, and self-sufficiency. Whereas the highest degree is Muhammadan worship, which is termed belovedness. The basis and essence of worship is to manifest the perfection of that reality by supplicating and beseeching Almighty God, showing deep humility before Him, offering thanks and true impotence and want, and by displaying self-sufficiency in the face of others. Some of the great saints have involuntarily and temporarily become proud and made complaints and ecstatic utterances, but they should not be followed voluntarily on such points. They are rightly guided, but not the guide. Their way may not be taken. The eighth abyss. Some of those who journey spiritually are self-centered and precipitate and want to consume in this world the fruits of sainthood, which will be given in the hereafter. They fall into an abyss by seeking them on their spiritual journeyings. But as such verses as, the life of this world is but goods and chattels, proclaim, and as is proved decisively in many of the words, a single fruit in the realm of eternity is superior to 1,000 gardens in this fleeting world. For this reason, those blessed fruits should not be consumed here. If without being sought they are given to eat here, they should be thanked for and deemed divine favors bestowed, not as reward, but for encouragement. Ninth allusion. Here we shall describe briefly 9 out of the truly numerous fruits and benefits of the Sufi path. The first is the unfolding and clarification by means of the Sufi paths that are on the straight way of the truths of faith, which are the keys, sources, and springs of the eternal treasuries of everlasting happiness. It is their manifestation at the degree of the vision of certainty. The second, since the Sufi path is a means of working the heart, the mainspring of the human machine, and of causing it to stir the other subtle faculties into motion, it drives them to fulfill the purposes of their creation and thus makes a person into a true human being. The third, on the journey to the intermediate realm and the hereafter, it is to join one of the lines of the Sufi orders and become a member of its luminous caravan on the road to eternity. The person is thus saved from loneliness and finds the friendship of the other members in this world and in the intermediate realm, and relying on their consensus and accord in the face of the attacks of doubts and fears, and seeing each of their masters as a powerful support and proof, he repulses through them those doubts and instances of misguidance. The fourth is to understand by means of the pure Sufi way the knowledge of God to be found in belief in God, and the pleasure of love of God within the knowledge of God, and by so understanding to be saved from the desolation of this world and man's exile in the universe. We have proved in many of the words that the happiness of both worlds and pain-free pleasure and intimacy untainted by loneliness and true delight and untroubled happiness are all to be found in faith and the reality of Islam. As is explained in the second word, faith produces the seed of a tuba tree of paradise. It is through the training and nurturing of the Sufi path that the seed grows and develops. The fifth is to pursue through an awakening of the heart elicited by the Sufi path and remembrance of God the subtle truths contained in the obligations of the Sharia and to appreciate them. Then the person obeys and performs his worship not under compulsion but with longing. The sixth is to rise to the station of reliance on God and the rank of submission to Him and winning His pleasure, which are the means of obtaining true delight, real solace, pain-free pleasure, and friendship untainted by loneliness. The seventh is true sincerity, which is the essential precondition for traveling the Sufi way and its most valuable result, to be delivered from base qualities like implicitly associating partners with God, hypocrisy, and artificiality. It is also to be saved through purifying the soul, which is like the surgical operation of the Sufi path, from the dangers of the evil commanding soul and the perils of egotism. The eighth, through the regard, sense of the divine presence, and powerful intentions of the Sufi path, gained by recalling God with the heart and reflecting on Him with the mind. This is to transform customary actions into worship and make mundane dealings into actions benefiting the hereafter. Utilizing the capital of life, it is to make all its minutes into seeds that will produce the shoots of eternal happiness. The ninth is to struggle to be a perfect human being through journeying with the heart and striving with the spirit and spiritual progress, that is to say, to be a true believer and total Muslim, that is, to gain not superficial belief, but the reality of belief and the reality of Islam, that is, to be directly the bondsman of the glorious Creator of the universe, in the universe and in one respect as the universe's representative, and to be his addressee and friend and beloved, and to be a mirror to him, and through showing man to be on the best of patterns, it is to prove man's superiority to the angels. It is to fly through the lofty stations with the Shariah's wings of faith and works, and to behold eternal happiness in this world, and even to enter upon it. Glory be unto you, we have no knowledge save that which you have taught us. Indeed, you are all-knowing, all-wise. O God, grant blessings and peace to the supreme help in every age, and the sublime spiritual pole at all times, our Master Muhammad. The magnificence of those sainthood was manifested in his ascension, as was the station of his being the beloved of God, and under the shadow of whose ascension are included all sainthoods, and to all his family and companions. Amen. And all praise be to God, the sustainer of all the worlds. Addendum. This short addendum has great importance. It is beneficial for everyone. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. This short addendum has great importance. It is beneficial for everyone. The ways leading to Almighty God are truly numerous. While all true ways are taken from the Qur'an, some are shorter, safer, and more general than others. One of these is the way of impotence, poverty, compassion, and reflection, from which, with my defective understanding, I have benefited. Indeed, like ecstatic love, impotence is a path which, by way of worship, leads to winning God's love, but it is safer. Poverty too leads to the divine name of all merciful. And like ecstatic love, compassion leads to the name of all compassionate, but is a swifter and broader path. Also, like ecstatic love, reflection leads to the name of all wise, but it is a richer, broader, and more brilliant path. This path consists not of 10 steps like the 10 subtle faculties of some of the Sufi orders, tariqat, employing silent recollection, nor of 7 stages like the 7 souls of those practicing public recitation, but of 4 steps. It is reality, hakikat, rather than a tariqat. It is Sharia. However, let it not be misunderstood. It means to see one's impotence, poverty, and faults before Almighty God, not to fabricate them or display them to people. The method of this short path is to follow the practices of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, perform the religious obligations, and give up serious sins. And it is especially to perform the prescribed prayers correctly and with attention, and following them to say the tasbihat. The verse, therefore, do not justify yourselves, points to the first step. The verse, and be not like those who forget God, and he therefore makes them forget their own selves, points to the second step. The verse, whatever good happens to you is from God, but whatever evil befalls you is from yourself, points to the third step. The verse, everything will perish save his countenance, points to the fourth step. A brief explanation of these 4 steps is as follows. The first step, as the verse, therefore, do not justify yourselves, suggests, it is to not purify the soul. For, on account of his nature and innate disposition, man loves himself. Indeed, he loves himself before anything else, and only himself. He sacrifices everything other than himself to his own soul. He praises himself in a manner befitting some object of worship. He absolves and exonerates himself from faults in the same way. As far as he possibly can, he does not see faults as being appropriate for him and does not accept them. He defends himself passionately as though worshipping himself, even using on himself the members and faculties given him as part of his nature in order to praise and glorify the true object of worship. He displays the meaning of the verse, who takes as his God his own desires. He considers himself, he relies on himself, he fancies himself. Thus, his purification and cleansing at this stage, in this step, is to not purify himself, it is not to absolve himself. Second step, as the verse, and be not like those who forget God, and he therefore makes them forget their own selves, teaches, man is oblivious of himself and is not aware of himself. If he thinks of death, it is in relation to others. If he sees transcendence and decline, he does not attribute them to himself. His evil commanding soul demands that, when it comes to inconvenience and service of others, he forgets himself, but when it comes to receiving his recompense and to benefits and enjoyment, he thinks of himself and takes his own part fervently. His purification, cleansing, and training at this stage is the reverse of this state. That is to say, when oblivious of himself, it is not to be oblivious. That is, to forget himself when it comes to pleasure and ambition and greed, and to think of himself when it comes to death and service of others. Third step. As the verse, whatever good happens to you is from God, but whatever evil befalls you is from yourself, teaches, the nature of the evil commanding soul demands that it always considers goodness to be from itself and becomes vain and conceited. Thus, in this step, a person sees only faults, defects, impotence, and poverty in himself, and understands that all his good qualities and perfections are bounties bestowed on him by the all-glorious Creator. He gives thanks instead of being conceited, and offers praise instead of boasting. According to the meaning of the verse, truly he succeeds who purifies it. His purification at this stage is to know his perfection to lie in imperfection, his power in impotence, and his wealth in poverty. Fourth step. As the verse, everything will perish save his countenance, teaches, the evil commanding soul considers itself to be free and independent and to exist of itself. Because of this, man claims to possess a sort of dominicality. He harbors a hostile rebelliousness towards his true object of worship. Thus, through understanding the following fact, he is saved from this. The fact is this. According to the apparent meaning of things, which looks to each thing itself, everything is transitory, lacking, accidental, non-existent. But according to the meaning that signifies something other than itself, and in respect of each thing being a mirror to the all-glorious Maker's names, and charged with various duties, each is a witness, it is witnessed, and it is accident. The purification and cleansing of a person at this stage is as follows. In his existence, he is non-existent, and in his non-existence, he has existence. That is to say, if he values himself and attributes existence to himself, he is in a darkness of non-existence as great as the universe. That is, if he relies on his individual existence and is unmindful of the true giver of existence, he has an individual light of existence like that of a firefly and is submerged in an endless darkness of non-existence and separation. But if he gives up egotism and sees that he is a mirror of the manifestations of the true giver of existence, he gains all beings and an infinite existence. For he who finds the necessary existent one, the manifestation of whose names all beings manifest, finds everything. Conclusion. The 4 steps in this way of impotence, poverty, compassion, and reflection have been explained in the 26 words so far written, which are concerned with knowledge of reality, the reality of the Sharia, and the wisdom of the Qur'an. So, here we shall allude briefly to only 1 or 2 points as follows. Indeed, this path is shorter because it consists of 4 steps. When impotence removes the hand from the soul, it gives it directly to the all-powerful one of glory. Whereas, when the way of ecstatic love, the swiftest way, takes the hand away from the soul, it attaches it to the metaphorical beloved. Only after the beloved is found to be impermanent, thus it goes to the true beloved. Also, this path is much safer because the ravings and high-flown claims of the soul are not present on it. For, apart from impotence, poverty, and defect, the soul possesses nothing so that it oversteps its mark. Also, this path is much broader and more universal. For, in order to attain to a constant awareness of God's presence, a person is not compelled to imagine the universe to be condemned to non-existence and to declare there is no existence but He, like those who believe in the unity of existence, nor to suppose the universe to be condemned to imprisonment in absolute oblivion, and to say, there is nothing witnessed but He, like those who believe in the unity of witnessing. Rather, since the Qur'an has most explicitly pardoned the universe and released it from execution and imprisonment, one on this path disregards the above and dismissing beings from working on their own account and employing them on account of the all-glorious Creator, and in the duty of manifesting the most beautiful names and being mirrors to them, he considers them from the point of view of signifying something other than themselves, and being saved from absolute heedlessness, he enters the divine presence permanently. He finds a way leading to Almighty God in everything. In short, dismissing beings from working on account of other beings, this way is to not look at them as signifying themselves,